Welcome back to another edition of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Hare, joined with my co-host, Jacob Roblom. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Eliot Shorr-Parks. Thank you so much for being with us, Eliot.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm excited to be on the Jacob and Jacob pod.
So, Eliot is a graduate of Temple University. He's been covering the Eagles for the past 6 seasons, and he also has written 2 books. And let's just get rolling right off the bat. So, Eliot, what was your biggest takeaway from this Eagles team from last season?
From last season, I think, look, the arrow ended pointing up on Carson, and that's the biggest takeaway. At the end of the day, what happens with this team really depends on how Carson's playing. 12 games into the season, things weren't looking great for the team as a whole. Carson was struggling. I think he would tell you that, especially he played well against Miami, but coming off that loss against Miami, things were pretty down, and Carson did what franchise quarterbacks do. He put them on their back. He led them to the playoffs. Unfortunately, he didn't play in the playoff game, but I think the biggest takeaway from last year was Carson making it to 16 games healthy, leading the team to the playoffs, and getting the division title.
Yeah, for sure. That 4-game stretch in December was just remarkable by Carson. And I think it proved that he was an elite quarterback.
Well, I think to be an elite quarterback, you have to do it for a few years in a row, right? I mean, I think the special players are guys that you can count on to do it year in and year out. I think what Carson did last year was it was a great step in the right direction. I want to see what Carson does next year. I think Carson has the potential to be a top 5 guy. I think right now he's still probably in that 8 to 12 range, maybe, 9 or 10, something like that. But no, look, how he ended the year was absolutely, it was huge for this organization.
And do you think he'll take sort of how he played during that 4-game stretch and continue that play into this season?
Well, the interesting thing is he's not going to really have an offseason. I mean, when you look at Carson's career in a rookie year, obviously his offseason was different because he went through the combine and all that. 2018, he was rehabbing during the offseason. 2019, he wasn't rehabbing as much, but he still had a bit of an abbreviated offseason. And now he's dealing with, of course, no OTAs and mini camps. So, and we'll see about training camp. So I do think the arrow is pointing up on Carson heading into next year for sure. I think he'll have more weapons around him to start the year, which will help him. So I think there's a good chance he picks up where he was last year.
Thanks. So the Eagles obviously made a bunch of moves this offseason with trading for Darius Slay and also signing Nickell Robey-Coleman and definitely letting Malcolm Jenkins go. Are you satisfied with the moves that Howie Roseman and this organization made during the offseason, or would you like to see some other moves made?
Just on defense or as a whole?
As a whole, not just defense.
Well, I think they're probably better on defense, although I will caution people, like the loss of Malcolm Jenkins is a really big one. Malcolm was the most important player on that defense. He was the best player on that defense last year. He played a lot of unique roles. And I like Jalen Mills a lot. There's probably not a media member in this city that's defended Jalen Mills more than I have since he's gotten here. But it's just really hard to ask him to go from a cornerback role to Malcolm's role and be that type of guy. Now, Will Parks is going to fulfill some of that, and we'll see. But I do think the loss of Malcolm is a big one. I really like the Darius Slay trade. I'm not as concerned as other people are about his age. I thought bringing in an elite-level cornerback was something this team needed. So I really like that. I like the Hargrave signing. I think he'll help Fletcher Cox. So I think as a whole, the defense is probably better, but the loss of Malcolm offsets it. Where my concern is with this team is on the offensive side of the ball. We knew going into this offseason the biggest need at receiver, but most specifically was speed. Now, they addressed it in the draft, but we have no idea what those players are going to be. It's hard for me to sit here and say you can count on Jalen Reagor, John Hightower, Quez Watkins, even Marquise Goodwin because of the injuries last year to do anything. So I don't think they're better off considerably at receiver than they were last year, and that's still a concern for me.
Would you like to see them bring in maybe a veteran running back like Devonta Freeman or Carlos Hyde or even LaShawn McCoy?
Yeah, I think they should. Now, I think Miles Sanders and Boston Scott are maybe the best 1-2 punch in the NFL. I mean, there's probably 2 or 3 if you really look at it, but they're up there. I think they can be dynamic. They're playmakers. If you get them in space, they can really do things with the ball. So I really like that combo. The reason I think they need a veteran guy, though, is neither of them have done it for 16 games. Miles Sanders is going into his second year. It's hard for running backs to kind of go from first to second year and be that same type of player. And Boston Scott, as good as he was at the end of last year, has not contributed for 16 games. So someone like Devonta Freeman, I think, would make sense because he complements those two. But if, God forbid, Miles Sanders gets hurt or Boston Scott doesn't play like he did last year, I think Devontae Freeman could be an every down contributing running back.
Hey,
So sticking with the offense, obviously there's been a lot of question about the second round pick of Jalen Hurts. What do you make of that pick?
I mean, where to begin, right? Like this is the pick is, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, look, it makes sense if you have concerns about Carson in the long run, then I think it makes sense. If you think Jalen Hurts is going to be the next franchise quarterback, I get it. Now, I don't know if I would have done it, but at least if the Eagles came out and said, you know what, Carson's been hurt a lot, we got to protect ourselves and get someone ready to potentially take over for him, then it would make sense. But I don't like it if what you're doing is trying to flip him because you spent a second round pick on him. I'd be surprised if you got higher than the 53rd overall pick in a trade for him back. And even if you do, you're really just kind of breaking even in a lot of ways, and you're wasting 2 years of a guy where you could have a contributing player on the roster. Now, if you're telling me Taysom Hill is he's going to come and do that, I hate that idea. I don't like the idea of taking Carson off the field. I don't like the idea of doing a 2-quarterback system. The Eagles' offense is fine. The Eagles' offense has not been good the last 2 years because of injuries and poor play from the quarterback position. Once they have Carson healthy and playing at a high level, and hopefully if their receivers are better, this offense will be fine. Doug knows what he's doing. He's a Super Bowl winning head coach. You don't need to get super cute or reinvent the wheel here. I hate the idea of a 2-quarterback system. I hate the idea of a Taysom Hill. So I didn't like the pick overall. I like Jalen Hurts as a prospect, but I didn't like the pick.
So after the draft, the Eagles came out and said that they're trying to build a quarterback factory. Is that fair of them to say after going 9-7 the past years, and after the Patriots, who've done it for many years, are however many times Super Bowl champions and however many times division champs?
Well, I think the spirit of what they said is true. I mean, I'm sure the quarterback factory line is going to stick with them. It just is, right? It's going to be the new norm, the gold standard, that type of thing. But they are correct. Like you do want to have as many good quarterbacks as possible. The only thing I disagree with is using the asset that they did. Like I agree with them. You should draft quarterbacks every year, develop them. You should have a really good backup quarterback. Those all make sense. The issue I have is using a second-round asset on the backup quarterback, especially when you could go and sign Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, those type of guys, Joe Flacco once he's healthy, even Cam Newton is still available. So I like the idea of the Eagles always prioritizing the quarterback position. It's the most important position in sports. They've seen what a good backup does. I just don't like what their plan was.
And what do you think like the mindset of Carson Wentz is when he sees a player like Jalen Hurts get drafted? Do you think he sort of feels like offended by that pick, or how do you think he viewed it?
I'm sure he wasn't thrilled, right? I can't imagine Carson's was super thrilled when he saw the Jalen Hurts pick. Now, Carson has talked about it, and he said that, he knows Eagles are committed to him. He signed that long-term deal last offseason. Obviously, it was for a lot of money. And he's right. Like, I don't think the Eagles are going to be benching Carson this year. But the reality is having Jalen Hurts on the roster makes it easier to move on from Carson. Like, if Jalen gets in the building and, the Eagles fall in love with him, they can tell he's special. You can't tell me selling high on Carson is not a good idea next offseason. Now, that's if the Eagles like him. They'll know Jalen in a year better than we will, because in theory we won't see him play. So I think Carson knows that anytime a high pick is used on a backup player, that's not great. His maybe his best friend on the team, Zach Ertz, saw something similar happen with Dallas Goedert. So he knows about the dynamics of it, but I don't think Carson is worried that much about it.
Thanks. And then so Jason Peters now he's a free agent, and he's drawn some interest from teams. Do you think the Eagles should look into re-signing him, or do you think Andre Dillard is time for him to step up and be the left tackle of the future?
It's a tough question because I think Jason Peters is a better player than Andre Dillard. And I think when it comes to protecting your franchise quarterback, you don't play around. You don't put guys out there that you're not 100% confident in. That being said, you use a first-round pick on Andre Dillard. Like, you have to play him. And it's not like receiver, running back, even corner, or almost every position on defense. Like, offensive lineman, continuity is super important. You can only have one out there. So I think I would bring back Jason Peters just because I'm not confident in Andre Dillard. But I understand, like, once you drafted Dillard last year, you kind of made the decision that in 2020 he would be the starter. So it's a tough spot to be in.
So do you think not having an offseason is affecting their decision about maybe bringing back Jason Peters?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, Doug was asked about it, and he said we're going to have to lean on our veterans early. So I think that there's a component of that. But look, Andre Dillard was here all last year. Like, it's not like Dillard's a rookie. I mean, Jalen Reagor is a rookie, and they're counting on him to be a big-time player in this offense. At least I would presume so, right? So if you're going to tell me on one hand, yeah, we think Jalen Reagor can make a big difference, but you don't think Andre Dillard, who was in the building all last year, started multiple games, got playing time, is like, those don't really add up. So I think it's a bit of an excuse. If they bring back Jason Peters, any excuse they use for Dillard won't make sense outside of we just don't think he's very good.
And do you think that maybe they could sign Peters to a one-year deal and then potentially trade Dillard and look to the draft to draft the left tackle next year?
Well, the tough part about trading Dillard is a couple things. One, you just used, I think it was the 23rd overall pick, maybe the 21st overall pick on him. So you're not going to get more than that. There's cap implications of trading him. I think you would actually lose cap space if you traded him. So unless you're getting a second or third round pick, there's no point in trading Dillard. If you sign Jason Peters, you're better off just keeping Andre as a backup just and see what happens, because you're not going to get anything close to the value that you used on him right now.
So going back to talking about the offseason, this offseason, a lot of people thought Eagles would try to bring in an offensive coordinator, which mostly every NFL team does. What do you make of them hiring a few offensive specialists and not hiring a real offensive coordinator?
It's an interesting strategy. Now, a lot of the teams around the league are doing it. San Francisco does something like that. The Rams do something like that. So I think when you have a head coach that calls the plays, the need for somebody to be an offensive coordinator isn't as big. So I like that they brought in guys with different ideas. Marty Mornhinweg coming in from the Baltimore system of what they do with Lamar Jackson. Rich Scangarillo coming in from San Francisco, who I think has one of the most creative offenses in the league, if not the most creative offense in the league. So I do like that. Press Taylor being promoted. I know him and Carson are very close, so that does make some sense. I don't love the idea of thinking that someone that's been in the building for 2 years is then going to make a big difference next year. But I think that surrounding Doug with as many coaches as possible that can give him ideas and let him work with them is a good strategy.
Do you think the hiring of Marty Mornhinweg from the Ravens impacted the Hurts pick just because of how similar Hurts and Jackson are in their play styles?
Well, I don't think Hurts and Jackson are that similar. Like, I mean, I get that they're both running quarterbacks, so I see your point, but Lamar Jackson is a special player. Like, the way Lamar runs is not the way Jalen Hurts runs. And that's not even a slight at Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is a very good mobile quarterback. Lamar Jackson, outside of Michael Vick and, like Randall and guys like that, might be the most athletic player we've ever seen at the position in terms of speed and elusiveness. And again, Vick was certainly up there. But I think comparing Lamar Jackson to if they're planning on doing what the Ravens did with Lamar Jackson with Jalen Hurts while also having Carson here, that's a mistake.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it'll be interesting to see how this offense sort of operates this year without that offensive coordinator. But I think they'll be good with Doug calling the plays and running the show. And so
I would agree.
Do you think Carson Wentz will be able to take this team on a deep playoff run? Because obviously we haven't seen his ability to do so yet. He hasn't really had the chance to do so. He got injured in the one playoff game he appeared in. So how do you feel about that?
I mean, that's the $135 million question or whatever he got in his deal, right? Like, I think the fact that Carson has not played in a playoff game up until this point is concerning. I think that although you can argue each of the injuries are fluke and were fluke, and I'm never someone – look, no injuries are the quarterback's fault. It wasn't Carson's fault he tore his ACL. It wasn't Carson's fault he hurt his back. But the first 4 years of his career, he hasn't won a playoff game. That's not a small sample size, right? That's a fairly large sample size. So I think Carson has the talent to do it. I think if they put the right pieces around him, it could happen. But it's, I can only go off what I've seen. And even though the arrow is pointing up, I think that, it's not looking great.
Do you think we'll ever see a 2017 version of Carson Wentz again, or was that just a fluke?
Well, I don't know if it was a fluke. I mean, when you talk about the team in general, and I've been covering the team for 8 years now and, watching sports my whole life, as I'm sure you guys have, that sometimes special teams just happen. And the Eagles were just a special team. Like, we might never see a lot of players on that team play to the level they did that year. Yeah. And that's not a slight on them. That's just, it takes a special team to win a Super Bowl. So Carson played at an unreal level that year. They would have won the Super Bowl if he stayed healthy. He would have been MVP, but he did get hurt. And I think that I hope this isn't the case, but I think when we look at Carson's career, we might look back on that injury and say that was a very clear turning point in it. So I don't think Carson will ever be 2017 Carson again. He doesn't have to be for this team to be a Super Bowl champion or to be special. But I just think it'd be very tough to get back up to that level of play again.
Do you think this team has the ability to be a playoff team in this upcoming season?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I do. I think the Eagles' structure of Howie, Doug, and Jeffrey Lurie always make them a contender. The division's very winnable. I think the Cowboys are really good, but the extra playoff spot could help the Eagles. And also, let's be honest, the Cowboys have been hyped up before and not done it, right? So I think the Eagles, if I had to bet, I think they're in the playoffs next year. But I don't think they're an 11 or 12 win team.
Does this put the Eagles over the edge right now that all three NFC East teams haven't worked with their new head coach yet, and the Eagles are the only team that have a head coach coming back from last season?
It's a definite advantage for sure, because when you talk about these new coaches aren't getting OTAs, they're not getting mini camps, they're not getting, we'll see what training camp looks like, and they're certainly not getting the extra work that new head coaches do. Now, I think that Mike McCarthy being a veteran head coach and Dallas having a roster that's kind of ready to win now will make it easier on them. But the Eagles, and this is why I wouldn't switch the offense up too much in addition, is because if you don't have a full offseason to work on it, I don't like the idea of making major changes. The Eagles should use that continuity they have over the other teams of the division and ride it into the beginning of next year.
I totally agree. And kind of sticking with uncertainty, what do you think is the biggest problem for the NFL next season regarding COVID-19 and having games?
I mean, that's a very complicated question, right? I think that in all walks of life, dealing with COVID is tough. You never really know what's gonna happen. I'm certainly not a doctor. The NFL presents some unique problems. I mean, 60,000 people in a stadium is going to be tough with what's going on. Guys that are, 22 guys on the field in a confined space, sweating, playing a sport, that's certainly tough. Guys being on the sideline. So it's just a tough situation the NFL is in. The good news is that compared to the other leagues, they've had a lot of time to get ready. Now, although information is always changing, they have more of a time to get ready. So I hope there's football. I hope in the fall we're all still talking Eagles, obviously. And I think there will be football.
Yeah, let's pray we're still talking Eagles in the fall.
Amen.
Yeah. Hopefully we have the NFL back.
Agreed. Agreed. I think we all want to see what's going to happen with Carson and the Eagles and just sports in general. So I'm optimistic that there will be football in some capacity.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Talk to you guys soon.